Okay, so this is the Chapter 17 SAT review test. Now, I put a little kind of disclaimer, I guess, in the directions. Remember that the digital SAT now is the reading and writing section. It combines grammar and reading comprehension. So this is not an exactly like SAT style test because it doesn't have reading comprehension. This is a grammar book. Also, I wanted to, with this test, make sure that you reviewed as many concepts as possible in the most efficient manner possible right before your exam so you can like remember like little things about pronouns and punctuation, like that sort of thing, rather than sticking to like the exact structure of the exam, if that makes sense. Now you'll see like in question number 1, it still has like the wording and there's like a little text excerpt like how it would be on the exam. It's just not going to be exactly like it, which is why this book, I tell you guys, hey, use this to learn the concepts and to do like a review of the concepts right before the exam, but get used to what the wording is, how the questions go, how many questions there are, your timing strategy, that sort of thing by doing practice tests. So I just wanted to like give that little disclaimer. And I do put like little notes also of like, hey, this is not an SAT style question if I did something like that, because I tried to maintain the structure as much as possible. So like here, I'm like, hey, this is not a digital SAT style question or like test question, that sort of thing, just so that you know. Okay, so let's get started. So pause to read number 1 if you haven't already. So here we have to make sure that we're being specific enough where we don't have an unclear pronoun issue. You can't use things like they or these because it's been so long since what they or these is supposed to refer to that your reader's going to be confused. You have to be very clear, like there can't be any like vague assumptions that need to be made. So this would be a pronoun clarity issue, or like an unclear pronoun issue. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. So I would want to be more specific for what we're referring to. And I know that the specific answers are C and D, the walls or the classroom. And then you could also see there's a little hint with the verb, subject verb agreement there, because were is plural. So it definitely has to be the walls, C. Okay, pause read number 2 if you haven't already. And also, I just realized I should have put at the beginning of this, hey, try these problems on your own first and then come back to this video for explanations. Forgot to say that, but now I did. I'll put like a little text excerpt at the beginning of the video. Anywho, so number 2, let's see, which of these choices? Okay, so remember right away, if you see stuff that's like similar in the answer choices and there's like shorter choices and longer ones, you want to start with like the shorter ones because it's the most concise, grammatically correct answer choice that's going to be correct. So I'm going to be looking at B, C, and D. So then let's see. You wouldn't say like begin or begun. You would say began. So it would be started, like, because you're talking in past tense. So you need to have that verb tense right there. So started would be the correct answer. Okay, pause to read number 3 if you haven't already. So this one's going to be B. Remember, it's with an apostrophe like A is going to be it is, which doesn't work there. You can't say I made sure it is branches. It would be its branches. And we're not talking about their branches. Like we're not talking about multiple people. It's a tree that we're referring to. Its branches. So it has to be singular possessive. It's B. So now pause for number 4 if you haven't already. So for number 4, the not acceptable answer would be C, because you're saying reach out to different areas of knowledge and then you're following that up with the list of those areas of knowledge. Like knowledge is not part of that list. It's the areas of knowledge that you're then listing after that word knowledge. So when we have a list that follows, we need to have one of those M dashes or a colon, or we can have like a phrase like such as and then have a comma series, that sort of thing. But C would be unacceptable. You can't just randomly put a comma because that's saying it's like that knowledge would be part of that list. Because remember, one way we can use commas is to to separate a list of items. So that's why it would be C. And I also noted this is not a digital SAT style question because remember, it's just going to be the grammar stuff is just conventions. It's going to say conventions of standard English or most logical transition. Like this one. Number 5. Pause to read if you haven't already. So here we have 2 independent clauses, meaning 2 things that could be their own sentence. As the hours passed, I realized I had lost track of time. That can be its own sentence. It was almost evening. That can be its own sentence as well. So you have 2 independent clauses. Those need to be connected by a comma, fanboy's word, a semicolon, or a period. And which of these has that option? Well, that would be A. Okay, now pause to read number 6 if you haven't already. So this is just kind of like a wording kind of thing. I didn't really include word choice. The way that it's on the exam, I kind of made it, it kind of falls more under comprehension. That's why I didn't include it in like the idioms and register and like word choice chapter or whatever I decided to call that. I forget. But it does show up on the exam, and I figured this was like a good little review of that, but it shows up more in like comprehension ways, which I'll get into in other resources. So this is like a placement kind of thing that you have to pay attention to, like what makes sense. Like boxes filled with teaching materials were scattered into the room, around the room, on the room, over, like you have to pick the right preposition. So this would be they're scattered around the room. Like you wouldn't say on the room, you wouldn't say over the room, you wouldn't say into the room, you would say around the room. Okay, so now for number 7, pause to read if you haven't already. So this question is testing parallel structure. So the correct answer would be B, because you have that parallel structure maintained right there. Began unpacking the boxes, sorting the classroom materials, and organizing the classroom seat. You see how it's all ing, verb, ing, verb, ing, verb, like it's all the same format. If you look at A, it's unpacking, sorting, organized. It's changing the verb tense. It's not having that parallel structure. And then if you look at C, that was a verb agreement issue where it's saying, take a deep breath, I were beginning to unpack the, like you don't say I were beginning to unpack. That's just doesn't, it's not the correct verb that you would put there. You say like maybe I began unpacking or something like how it is in the other ones. And then D is, let's see, began the process of unpacking the boxes, sorting the classroom materials, and organizing the classroom seating. That one is just like, it's the be concise rule, where you want to be as concise as possible, and B is the most concise, grammatically correct answer. So, and then let's go to number 8, pause read if you haven't already. So it can't be A, because if you put that comma placement there, then you have you would be saying you have a non-essential clause with memories of my training days that you could cross out, which you can't. You can't just say each item I pulled out, brought back, and I felt a deep appreciation for the journey. Like that's not a complete sentence. You're messing things up there. B has a comma before the preposition, which would also be inappropriate comma placement. C is the one that would be correct. Each item I pulled out brought back memories of my training days. Like there's no need for any sort of like extra punctuation there. And it's using the correct preposition, like brought back memories of my training days. You wouldn't say bring back or brought back memories with my training days. You're not with your training days. Like that just doesn't make sense. So now let's go to number 9, pause to read if you haven't already. So what goes in the blank for number 9 has to match up with bookshelves, which is plural. So we know it definitely has to be either they or them. And you wouldn't say like, so I began filling they with books. Like that doesn't make sense. You'd say I began filling them with books. So them is the correct, blanking on the word, object pronoun that goes there, because you're filling what? Like you're filling them. They would be like a subject. Okay, pause to read number 10 if you haven't already. So right away, I see it either has to be A or B just based off of the child versus children thing. So it has to be the plural version. So children's books instead of child's, because it's not just one child, it's children's books. So it has to be either A or B, and then let's see what other differences. It looks like, it's the from, to, from, and. Wording is what's different. So remember, words that go together, some words that go together would be from and to. So that's why it has to be A. So now pause to read number 11 if you haven't already. So right away, it definitely has to be one of the ones with they, because they is referring to the countless stories that would soon be shared. So there's going to be it's going to be plural, so you have to use they. And then going along with that, sorry, I have something in my eye. Going along with that, it's plural stories, so like you're not just going to have one lesson because it's multiple stories, so you're going to have multiple lessons, So it would be B. Okay, pause to read number 12 if you haven't already. So right away, remember, if you have a comma separating two adjectives, you have to be able to replace the comma with the word and it works. You can't say creating a cozy and reading place. It's cozy is modifying reading. So you can't say cozy and reading place. It's a cozy reading place. It all goes together. So it definitely can't be A or D. So now we're deciding between B and C. Now, obviously it's not cozy read place. That's just like, no. I don't even know how to describe that, but no, we don't have a cozy read place. We have a cozy reading place. I guess you could say that like read is a verb, so it doesn't go there. But I mean, it's just so automatic. I don't know how else to say that. If I think of something later, I'll put it here. I mean, I feel like that makes sense how I said it. Like, let me just rephrase it when I'm like not scatterbrained. So, read versus reading, like you read, like that's like typically used as like a verb or something. It's not an adjective, where reading is an adjective. So you have two adjectives that are describing the noun space in the proper format with C. Hopefully that made sense. Okay, so now let's go to number 13. Pause to read if you haven't already. So for number 13, it's going to be B because you're showing possession, but you have a plural noun. So you have to put an apostrophe after the S. So it would be students with an apostrophe after the S, artwork. Okay, pause to read number 14 if you haven't already. So for this one, the correct answer is C. Now you're listing, there's two different things at play here. You're listing a series of items. So you have to separate those with commas. So C does that correctly because calendar is one item, reminders is another, and a set of classroom rules is another one of those items. So you have to separate each of those with a comma. Now you'll see that there's another option that does that, but the problem with A is that it says insuring with an I instead of insuring with an E. So think of like insuring with an I, like insurance, like you insure your car or something like that, versus insuring with an E has a different meaning. It's like you're ensuring that you'll do something. You're, what else would you say that? Like you are guaranteeing. Like you're guaranteeing that you're going to do something. And also this is not an SAT style question, but again, like I said. So now pause and read number 15 if you haven't already. So for number 15, just based off of the whole singular versus plural thing that it has to be C or D because it's referring to a plant, which is singular. So it has to be C or D. And then you have to decide, okay, is it this or that? Well, it has to be this piece, C, because if you put that piece, it would say, I hoped that piece. And that that is not correct. So it would have to be C. And then let's pause and read number 16 if you haven't already. So we have an introductory phrase that has to be followed by a comma, meaning we have with the room finally ready has to be followed by a comma. And then we have the only two options that we can choose from are C and D based off of that. Now, the difference between C and D are right before anticipating, one has no comma, one has a comma. Now, it's the one with a comma is correct because you have that verbing modifier. Remember, back in the punctuation chapter, we talked about that, where if you're separating an independent and a dependent clause, where you could have that, one of the ways that you do that is with a comma verbing modifier, which is anticipating there. So that's why it would be D. Okay, pause to read number 17 if you haven't already. So here you have commas around the portion that says whose origin traces back to the vibrant city of Recife in Brazil. So that's your non-essential clause that you can cross out. So we should be able to read Romero Brito and whatever we put after as a complete sentence. So Romero Brito has catapulted himself from a self-taught doodler to a commanding figure in the contemporary art world. That's the one that does that. Everything else would not form a complete coherent sentence. So it can't be any of the other options. So now pause to read number 18 if you haven't already. Okay, so this one would have to be A, because if you're putting a comma after the word been, then you have the non-essential clause that forms for several decades, which is what you need to do because you can cross out for, remember the trick of like you can cross it out because it's non-essential and still read it as a sentence. We could still say infusing his creations with a blend of pop art, cubism, and graffiti influences. Brito's works have been an omnipresent part of the global art landscape, from art galleries to massive public installations. And that's a complete sentence. So that would be, which one was that? A. Now you'll notice also with like D that you have that as well. Like you could still have that non-essential clause if you pick D. The issue there is that it's not as concise as answer choice A. Remember, we want to be as concise as possible while also being grammatically correct. So now pause to read number 19 if you haven't already. So with number 19, students get usually confused between picking C and D. So it's going to be answer choice C. And hear me out. This is why. It causes quite a ruckus sometimes. D, while you might be trying to be as concise as possible, you're losing relevant context there. So you'll notice at the end of the sentence, it's talking about like international acclaim. So you need to be referring to the world's art enthusiasts, not just regular old art enthusiasts. You're losing that context there. You can't just be concise for the sake of being concise. It also has to like match what's going on. You can't just shorten things and then lose meaning, you know? So let's continue. Okay, so pause to read number 20 if you haven't already. So here, the correct answer would be D, because then that would form, we would have an independent clause at the beginning that could be its own sentence, the underlying belief that art poses a unique capability to not only inspire but also create joy, knows no boundaries. And then you would have the verbing modifier dependent clause that follows, making it a universal sign that breaks cultural barriers. The only necessary comma with that situation happening is the comma that's already there after boundaries. You don't need those extra unnecessary commas that they're adding in options A through C. You can't justify them. Okay, pause to read number 21 if you haven't already. So for this one, the correct answer would be C, and that's because you need to put a comma after the word after Super Bowl, because you're going to have that non-essential clause that you can cross out there, because you could cross out, if you put the comma there, you can cross out including the World Cup and the Super Bowl, and you could still have a complete sentence. Having collaborated with renowned brands for monumental global events, Brito has created artwork that appeals to a broad spectrum of audiences. So you could still have that complete sentence, and that's the only option that allows you to do that. A lot of people would get also mixed up with like A and B. You have to remember that you have to do that, like that sentence check. And when you form that sentence, it might sound good to you, but you have to remember also with modifiers, like it's not his artwork that we're talking about. We're talking about Brito. So you have to be careful. Okay, so pause to read number 22 if you haven't already. So for number 22, the answer is B, and that's because it's the only one that has the M dash an M dash on each side of the non-essential clause. The non-essential clause being varying from collectibles to everyday utility items. So that's what you could cross out and still have a complete sentence. With intricately designed pieces, further solidify his vast influence. So then for number 23, pause to read if you haven't already, but it's going to be D because it's the option that if you're looking at just the wide-ranging portion, you can't say wide and ranging like you would have with A, and then remember it's the same thing with B because a comma between those two adjectives means that you have already wide and ranging should work for that to work as well. So then you're just left with C and D. And then the only one that could form a complete sentence is by having the correct verb tense there, which would be solidify. Okay, and pause to read number 24 if you haven't already. So for number 24, the correct answer would be B, and that's because you have to use him to refer to Brito. So that's that one. And then pause to read 25 if you haven't already. So for number 25, the not acceptable answer, like the one that you couldn't use, would be B. Because remember, you can always have an independent clause followed by an explanation with an M dash or a colon separating them. But, and also you could have the two independent clauses always can be separated if they're closely related by a semicolon. However, for option B, you would have to have like a comma fanboys in order to separate two independent clauses like that. You can't just put a comma there. That would be incorrect. And then I just put a little note that that's not the same format as the digital SAT, but it's just a good review question. So now let's go over here. So this is also not the pattern of the digital SAT because it's all its own little like excerpt. But again, for efficiency's sake, pause to read number 26 if you haven't already. So right away for number 26, you know that it can't be A or B because that would be R has to match with a plural. So it has to be the singular is for C and D. And then also you see you have the word choice or the word pairs that go together, like the words that go together would be but also, not only and but also. So you have to maintain that. So then it would have to be D. And then pause read number 27 if you haven't already. I mean, this one kind of is already playing into number 26 with the not only but also thing. So you have to pick either A or B to maintain that. Remember that but and but also, that those are both acceptable. So then that's why the correct answer has to be A. You don't need the unnecessary comma there. There's no reason for it. Remember, you only use a comma fanboys if you're separating two independent clauses. Okay, number 28 is hard to get on the screen at the same time. So you might want to just like pause to read this and go back as needed. So for number 28, it's referring to this question. And the answer for 28 is going to be A because it has that non-essential clause again. It's the only option that correctly sets off that non-essential clause and then also has the correct verb tense for indicates. Okay, so now this is going to be a different question. Number 29, pause to read if you haven't already. And I just realized there was a typo right here. So 20, the bolded portion is supposed to go like right here. After the designs right here and before Brito, that's where it's asking about the transition. So I'll fix that now. But so pause to read that now, knowing that. So this one's a little tricky because you have two contradicting transitions. So the function of the transition is to contradict because it's saying many artists restrict themselves to muted palettes and subtle designs, and then you're switching it up to say Brito's vibrant colors are frequently juxtaposed with abstract patterns on bold, like the two opposites right there. So you're contradicting. So you have to use either in contrast or even so. Now, even so, like there's some translation, the best way to think about them would be translations for like transitions, where you can memorize like other phrases that should match in place of them. And one of them would be even so is supposed to match with in spite of this fact. Like if you say even so, it should match in spite of this fact. But when you're saying in contrast, that's more of like when you're trying to show that there's a difference between what you said before and what you're saying now, which is what we're trying to do there. So in contrast would be the correct answer. Now, you're probably not going to have something that nuanced on the exam, but you can, which is why I put it here.